What's going on, guys? In this video, I'm going to cover the basics of Bookmap. So we're going to turn the candlesticks off, we're going to get rid of all the fancy indicators Bookmap offers, and I'm going to show you the basics, and that is the volume analysis that Bookmap gives us. The first thing we're going to look at is the volume dots or the volume bubbles. What we're going to do is come up to Studies Configuration, come to our volume dots, and just go through our settings really quickly. We have our volume display on 3D bubbles instead of 2D dots, total volume versus volume delta buy minus sell. You could change the size, that is the size of the bubbles themselves. You could also change the transparency of it so you could really see through them a lot more clearly, or so they're a bit more prominent and you could see them in their thick, but you can't really see the bid and the ask, and also some of the heat levels behind it too. So I would suggest to at least keep it about halfway, if not a bit more than halfway. The clustering could go by smart, by time, volume, price and aggressor. You could also, again, change these as well. You could always change it and get a feel for it. You could also change it in the replay system, which I would definitely recommend doing. That way you could sort of see what works for you and what doesn't work for you depending on your trading strategy. So now that we went through the settings, what do the volume bubbles tell us? The volume bubbles basically show us everything that went through as a transaction on the time and sale. So that's true volume and real market participants and orders getting filled. So if we were looking at some sort of candlestick chart like we have on TradingView on the right hand side, we would see that we have our candlesticks and we have our volume on the lower side. Whereas on Bookmap, we have our volume on the bottom, but the volume we see here with the bubbles is also the volume that was executed on that time in sales. So instead of wondering, is this a lot of volume for buyers? Is this a lot of volume for sellers? We could see, okay, this was a lot of selling volume. This was a lot of buying volume. And we could see our buyers trapped at this point, our sellers trapped at this point, and we could also see how strong some of the levels are. So this level at 18,314 is seen on the heat map, also seen on the current order book. This shows us what we would see on something like the level 2. That would be the bid and the ask. That's a lot of passive orders sitting here, and the market likes to gravitate to these levels almost like a magnet. So once we let time sort of play through a little bit, we'll fast forward and we'll see how price reacts. Now we could see with the bubbles, we have very weak buying pressure at this point. So anybody who was in for this uptrend is now having trouble. So we were up in the morning, but now at this point, we're sort of starting to base out. Sellers are stepping in. That's a strong sell wall in a supply zone. We might look to even start a short position with our stop loss at the highs. So we would let this play out. Again, this is fast forward, so this is not real time. And again, this is the replay system as well. So we see that a lot of selling is starting to hit the market, and we see that also with the bubbles, right? These bubbles are more red. That means there's more selling. And we're going to see a lot of strength and some heavy bubbles come right through those zones right there. See how much bigger these bubbles are compared to these? That means there's more volume and it's a lot stronger. The market is very aggressive, hitting the bid or hitting the ask once the bubbles are much larger, breaking these levels. So now that we know what the bubbles are showing us, what is the heat map in the current order book? So the heat map in the current order book symbolizes what the level 2 is, and that's the bid and the ask, and it shows us the passive buyers and the passive sellers. Now when we have strong levels like we see here at 18,314, 18,320, these are very strong levels that require strong volume and momentum to break. So we could watch these levels and watch for the market to try to make a fast move at these levels and see how strong the volume is. And with that, we could see on the session volume profile the sellers picking up versus the buyers picking up. And we see that a strong sell order has now formed right up top. This is a strong sell wall that just started to form while we are creating some lower highs. So that's something to take note of while we're also coming down to these strong areas of buyers. There's a lot of people with their stop orders down here and a lot of liquidity that needs to be swept. So we would keep an eye on the bubbles to see how the volume is fluctuating, and we would keep an eye on the heat map to see if we could break these levels with momentum for a nice quick scalp lower. So we let this play out. and we get that strong move like we saw earlier. We sweep these levels, and what's great with Bookmap as well is it keeps those levels in the past, so we could then mark this off and know, okay, this was a support level. This now might act as a resistance zone, so we would be able to come up to our drawing tool, add either a line, a rectangle, whatever we're looking for, click, drag, and now we have our area that we might look for a retest or look to see if we could hold to continue the shorts lower. So now that we know what the heat map is, now that we know what the bubbles are, what in the world is the CVD? Well, the CVD is the cumulative volume delta, and it shows the buying aggressors and the selling aggressors of either that session or that chart range. Now, I normally have it on the session range, and what we could do is we could come up to our settings up here, cumulative volume delta, and you could change it from chart to session. When you do this, it will give you different results, because when we're looking at the session, we might be a bit more green than when we're looking at the chart, but that might give us a bit more of an example of how strong the sellers or buyers are. So that depends on your trading preferences and strategy, but remember, when we look at it, the only thing that's changing is the numbers, and we're also changing if this is green to red. So when we look at the session, it's the same thing, except we're at this 2400, 2600 mark. So we're going to keep that on. Again, that is the cumulative volume delta, and this just gives us a feel for how positive or how negative we are that day. It does not always mean if we're green we should buy, if we're red we should sell. It just gives us a feel for where the buyers or sellers are currently.